To this meeting of the Planning Application Board for Tuesday the 2nd of May 2023. Can I remind you all that this meeting has been live streamed and recorded. The recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Moving on to item number 1 on our agenda, that is the minute of the meeting of the 14th of February earlier this year, and that is for your approval. Happy with that? Yep. Item number 2, which is declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they may have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members explained why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Any amendment to the determination of an application moved by a member, which is contrary to the recommendations in a planning report, must be based only on planning reasons. The Chair will invite the member moving an amendment to clearly articulate his or her amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. The Chair may, at his discretion, continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the timeout protocol. A copy of that protocol has been made available to all members via the Planning Application Board folder, which is on SharePoint. The Planning Manager or the Development Management Team will present the recommendations of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the Chair may call upon the Legal Advisor or the Planning Advisor to provide advice to this board. Thank you. Now moving on to item number 3 on today's agenda. This is to erect a house, create an access and install private drainage system at number 10 Neep, Uig, Isle of Lewis. This planning application is considered by the appointed officer to raise sensitive issues and is therefore referred to the board for a decision. And can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak on this report?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. As the Chair said, this is a planning application which has been applied for in principle only at this stage, and it is to erect a house, to create an access to that house and to install a private drainage system. It's on a croft at 10 Neep in Uig in the Isle of Lewis. Yeah, sorry, I'm just. Okay, thank you. Okay. So we can take the next slide. I've put like the first 3 slides really are for the benefit of those members who are maybe less familiar with the area. So Neep is in Uig on the kind of north easterly facing coast. It's almost on the same latitude as Stornoway, if you like. So the croft there is outlined in red, and that just gives you a better detail of the extent of the croft. It's above the Thrinaberry Beach, otherwise known as Reef Beach. And you can see to the top left of the slide the map showing where the main settlement of Neep and Valthus, where the houses are. You can also see on the slide there, like the fenced areas that are, various crofts. This area has quite a complex arrangement for crofts, where the crofts and the common grazing are made up for lots of multiple parcels of land. So in terms of the site location, it's on croft land. In terms of the council's development strategy, it's classed as being out with settlement. It's southeast of the main settlement of Neep, and it's opposite the reef or Thrinaberry Beach, on the opposite side of the public road. It's undeveloped Maher land, and it's the only piece of Maher within Lewis and Harris that's designated as a Natura site, as a special area of conservation. There is Maher and Harris, but it's just designated SSSI, so it's not got the same conservation status as an SAC. The surrounding ground, it's largely under grazing. There's parcels here and there that have been fenced off. and the common between the public road and the beach is used as a seasonal caravan site. Now, the applicant has provided some additional images which I'll show towards the end of the presentation on the caravan site during the summer months when it's in use. As I said, the site is located out with settlement in relation to the spatial strategy in our own development plan. So these are just a kind of like aerial views to complement the maps. So again, you can see here, the site is here. The road comes through the village here, and it kind of winds up. There's a, where you see this dark area, there's a kind of raised area of land in this general area here. And then the road comes through and it drops down beside the beach and runs through all the way past the campsite building, which is here, just before you reach the stream. And then the road carries on all the way around. This is just a slightly more zoomed in area. And again, the road comes down the hill here towards the gate, towards the beach, and there's some photographs here. This area on the Maghair is used seasonally between April and September. It's a campsite. There is a facilities building here that was developed some years ago and a bit of car parking. This odd-shaped boundary here is the boundary of the croft, and the proposed house site is situated just on the edge of that. There's a mound, a kind of raised area here. To the back here, you can see like it's fairly wet and marshy. Quite a lot of reeds in this kind of area, and a kind of like loch in here. And then to the east, the land rises. So it's kind of unusual in that the beach is kind of north, east facing, northwest facing. And that's just a kind of repeat slide, slightly zoomed out. Again, the main part of the village here, the raised land here, proposed house site here, and then the caravan site in this area here. So just context the development site itself, the total area is 0.2 of a hectare. There's 0.1 of a hectare or 1,000 square meters allocated for the house site, and another 1,000 square meters in the track. The nearest residential properties are in Neep, and they're separated by raised landform. Physically, the distance isn't huge, it's about half a kilometre. The topography of the site itself, it's uneven, and there's a kind of raised mound or raised sort of hillock, and the site proposed for the house is slightly sloping, and then the access towards the site drops in level towards the road. The ground cover in the area of the site is kind of Maghair grassland, and then to the southwest you've got this kind of low-lying, waterlogged marshy area and rocky moorland. So the proposed development is a planning permission in principle that's sought, and it's for the erection of a dwelling house to create an access and install the drainage system. At this stage, which is fairly typical for planning permission in principle, no information on the actual house or any kind of auxiliary development that would happen within the curtilage of a house is provided. So as I mentioned, the Thrainaperi Maghair is designated a special area of conservation, and this feature of the special area of conservation is Maghair, the actual habitat of Maghair. So this area that's kind of outlined in lilac is the extent of the designated area. So the beach itself is here, and the campsite is up in this area, and you can see that's the settlement. Now, while I mean this is this map, the underlying map is maybe useful as well for another kind of issue, but you can see that there was obviously historic settlement here. So you can see there on the map, settlement remains of, and then you can see further south, Broch remains off. So, as is fairly typical with Machar elsewhere in the Outer Hebrides, it's likely that there is buried archaeology in this kind of wider area. So, proposed house site, as I say, is within this area of croft. It's called 910 Neep, small odd-shaped croft. And the track, the fence line you could see here is the edge of the croft, and then there would be an access required to connect to the public road. This starts off where there's a gate. Ellen, one of the gates here.
Just a bit further in, there's
Yeah.
a lower platform that that's
Yeah.
various accesses.
And this is the facilities area and the parking area for the campsite. This is an indicative layout that's been provided. So the croft boundaries are not on there, but you can see like here is the entrance into the campsite. Gate. To know that losing its power. And then the access would be created off the public road on the outside of the fence, and it would run along on the inside, on the outside, and then would pass through this gate, which you'll see in a photograph in a minute, and then the house site itself would be on the kind of raised area. So this is a photograph of as you've left Neep and you're coming down the hill towards the Machar and the area that's Machar. So the site it's quite difficult to pick out, but it's basically towards the back of one of these raised mounds. You know, the whole area is undulating, and actually that picture is zoomed in, so it may be slightly misleading in terms of the field of depth. And the white building is the caravan site facilities building. So going slightly further along the road, you can see again caravan site building there. You can see the beach, and then site is kind of again over towards the back of these mounds. And in the back here, you can see like where the ground drops off, and it's kind of low lying or marshy between these mounds and where you go into the rocky moorland. This is taken at the opposite end now, looking back towards the side. So the main part of the village is over the top, over the back of these hills, the back of these mounds. The road kind of comes down here, and the site again is probably behind, roughly behind, or maybe slightly to the right of the roof of the facilities building. Then this is where the kind of track would start off. Again, like this image is really just to let you see like what the landform is like. So rocky moorland at the back here, this kind of loch boggy area here, and then the track would come in off the public road and then turn and head along on the outside of the fence. So the track would basically go along the outside of the fence here, and it would pass into the croft roundabout where this gate is, and that's the area of raised land, which is the subject of the application. So again, like this is just closer in, so access through the gate, and then this is the fence line for the croft here. So you're talking about on the back of or side of that. And then that's just really to kind of indicate again where your track would be on the outside, it would go through the gate on the inside, and then like side over here. So just kind of taking members to the key planning issues to do the application. The Comhairle development strategy sets out the spatial strategy that guides the location of development. And basically, spatial strategies to guide where development should or should not be located, and the principles behind that. Sites out with settlement, and at the last development plan in 2018, Comhairle at the time determined that while in the past there was a presumption against housing out with settlement that there was capacity for limited housing, provided this design, scale, siting and materials could integrate and achieve a sympathetic fit with the landscape. The site is on a Comhairle special area of conservation. However, there's a seasonal campsite by the beach. The site itself is remote from the existing or kind of traditional NEEP residential housing. It is, with the exception of the campsite, an undeveloped area of the Comhairle, and therefore there would be a change and harm to the Comhairle landscape character. And also there is the potential for a precedent for further development in the area where this application members minded to grant permission. So if you know, I don't know whether you could take us to the two images that were submitted by the applicant, so that members just understand the scale of the campsite. So this the building that was shown in the pictures earlier on. Obviously, like this is taken in summertime. This is like the beach is behind you. You're looking towards the campsite building, and so you're standing like effectively on the dunes, looking back towards the campsite. So this is the kind of formal campsite. The house site is over here, and there are various parcels of land. And under the kind of Caravan Scotland Act, it is permitted for people to have caravans stationed on croftland in the summer months, up to 3 units. But that is subject to satisfying the tests of the habitats regulations because the area is designated. And then this is obviously like taken from further up the hill, looking, you know, from the crags above, looking down. And again, like you can see, like the extent of the caravan site in the summer and consented caravan sites on that side of the road. And then there are, you know, isolated parcels of crofting where people allow 3 units to be sited. And then you can see the, like the rising land here and site here. And obviously somebody's allowing caravan storage there. Not sure who knew about that, but and then you can see like this low area here where there is the kind of like small loch, and then like this is a kind of reedy area. It's actually a very useful photograph just to kind of give context. And then you're obviously seeing out to the islands in the distance. So if I could take members to the report, please. So we've set out in detail our assessment in the report. So the executive summary aims to set out kind of just in summary the approach, but the report sets out at section 5 the description of the site and the general context. Section 5.9 and 5.10 just the description of the proposed development. Section 6 gives you the legislative context. Section 7.1 gives planning history. Now, a planning application was submitted in outline in 2007, but it was withdrawn before it was considered. So there is actually no determined planning history on the site. And then section 8 sets out the planning consultation advice that we've received from the various planning consultees. There are no notifiable neighbours, so public participation, it was advertised in the press, and no third-party representations were received. And then section 10 sets out our assessment against the policy. So the development plan now comprises of National Planning Framework 4 combined with the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. The various policies that are considered relevant are at section 10.4 of your report, and the assessment is set out at section 11.1 through to 11.49. And our conclusion, having carried out the assessment, is that while the development would comply with certain policies and have potential to comply with others. It's our view that it doesn't comply with policy 1, the development strategy. And that there would be harm to landscape character. And on that count, it wouldn't satisfy National Planning Framework Policies 16 and 17. Material considerations are set out at section 11.5. So, as covered in the slide, one of material considerations is the precedent that will be set by allowing development here. Section 11.51 sets out the views of the applicant, principally, around the applicant's perspective in that this is a croft and the need for development in Uig as a remote rural area, and the fact that the campsite is on the other side of the road, that the development is not isolated from human influence, and that there is infrastructure there in the sense of there is road, power, water. And then section 12 sets out recent conclusion. And then our recommendation is that the application be refused, and those reasons are set out at Appendix 1 of the report. And it might just be useful for the benefit of the tape just to read them out. So reason 1 is that the proposed development, on account of its siting on a raised grassy knoll in a largely undeveloped, undulating and low-lying Maher landscape, would be likely to compromise the integrity of the Maher landscape character type directly and views of the wider Maher, which is designated as a good example of Maher feature by the Thrainaberry Special Area of Conservation, and on that count would be contrary to policies DS1, the settlement strategy for development out with settlement, would be contrary to PD1, placemaking and design, NBH1, landscape, and policies 4, natural places 16 and 17, respectively, quality housing and rural housing of National Planning Framework 4. And the second reason being that if consented, the proposed development would introduce an undesirable precedent for further built development on this largely undeveloped area of Maher, potentially resulting in significant adverse cumulative impacts for landscape and visual impact, and in due course, significant adverse effects on the integrity of the Maher feature, which is designated as the Thrainaberry Special Area of Conservation. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morag, for that very extensive and detailed report. I would now like to take this opportunity to open this out to members of the board for any questions or comments. Councillor Macaulay.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Morag. Comprehensive as ever. I note that you said there's a capacity out with the settlement for limited housing. I wonder, do we know anything? The fourth features there were the design, scale, siting, and materials. Do we know anything about the proposed design, scale, how many bedrooms even, or whatever, and the materials that would be used? Do we have any information on that? Thank you.
Councillor, no, because the application has been submitted as a planning permission in principle. So we really like considering just generically whether the landscape would have capacity to accommodate a building of unknown scale, design, materials at this stage. And it's not unusual for a planning permission in principle to come in. Obviously, it's not an ideal approach in an outwith settlement area because you don't have reference points in terms of neighbouring development.
Morag, any other questions or comments? Any members online? Yes. Can I bring in Councillor McNeill?
Thank you, Chair. Do we know how long the campsite has been in place for? Has it always been there, or is it within? Is there full planning? What does that kind of precede current planning kind of regulations and stuff, or is it just something that got set up years ago and this grandfather's rights, and it's obviously up to standard nowadays?
Thank you, Councillor McNeill. My understanding is that it was, probably historically used informally as a campsite, as lots of the beaches and mahars in the Outer Hebrides were. It is the subject of a formal planning consent, which was granted probably about 15-20 years ago. Would that be as much as that?
Maybe a bit more than that.
Maybe a bit more than that.
It precedes the SEC designation.
Yeah, but it does precede. It was granted planning permission before it was designated as a special area of conservation. So the mahar the campsite precedes the designation.
So if that was, if that planning permission were to go in today for a campsite, it would be highly unlikely to be given.
I wouldn't like to call that.
No,
I mean, basically the areas designated, there is development in designated areas throughout the Hebrides. What would be required if it would come in, we would first of all seek the input of Nature Scot, formerly SNH, and it's likely because of the extent of the campsite that we would then require to carry out like a habitats regulation appraisal under the habitats regulations, and we would do that with input from Nature Scot. And if it could be concluded that a campsite could be accommodated without harm to the special features of the mahar, then you would be able, with conditions, to then grant planning permission. But it's a bit of a hypothetical question.
Yes, I have. Yeah, yes, I kind of appreciate that. I was just wanting, like a feeling of, it's just something that was that got in under the old radar rather than the current radar. So, thank you, ladies.
Thank you for that, Ian. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Ronald. Chair. My only difficulty with it is that this has been refused. Yet across the road there's caravans sighted for 6 months of the year. I know it's just been said that this was granted maybe before it became an area of special conservation, but or a special area of conservation. But that's the only thing that it kind of makes me wonder. That one person can have a caravan sighted for 6 months of the year, directly across from a place that we're going to refuse someone to build a permanent home in, if that's what it is. That's the only thing that
Comment to that,
goes through my mind.
Yeah, I think it's like fairly long established really that there are campsites on the mahar. There's throughout the Hebrides. Housing on the mahar, it varies place to place, but we have to assess the planning application based on the actual settlement and the settlement strategy. And our view was that this house was out with the established settlement pattern, this proposal for a site for a house. And notwithstanding, we're acknowledging the campsites there, and really it's for members to kind of take a view on whether our assessment is fair or whether they take a different view.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from members online? Members in the chamber? The recommendation before you at item 3.1 is that this application be refused. We have agreement. Members online, are you content with that recommendation?
Yes. No, I'm not.
that you, Councillor McNeill?
Yes, I was, I'm a bit torn on this one. And, you know, it's a crofting application for a croft house on a croft. And, you know, you've got a fairly large seasonal tourist facility. I would like a site visit to this one as well, before I make my mind up. Personally, that's my opinion, Chair.
With that suggestion, I'd like to ask members of the board, first of all, those present in the chamber, do you feel you have enough information before you today to make a decision on this matter, or would you like a site visit? Nice. Councillor Stewart? Councillor Macaulay?
I'm happy with the information that Mark has given us and all the information on the report. Thank you.
Can I now ask members online, starting with Councillor Mackenzie?
I'm happy with the information in front of us.
Thank you. Can I move on to Councillor John Norman MacLeod?
A wee bit. At first I thought, yes, yeah, I'm happy, but I didn't realise, I must have missed it, that it's actually a crofting application. And I'm just wondering, are we talking a young crofter here who works the croft, etc.? Am I allowed to get an answer for that?
Yeah.
So, more, Mrs. Ferguson.
Planning permission can have no regard to who the applicant is, or indeed whether it's a croft or not a croft. Planning has to have regard to the spatial strategy that's set out by the Comhairle in its development plan. So you're looking at the principles that are set out in the development plan rather than, you know, what the tenure is, because tenure is not a planning matter. It is the case that there are crofts all over, you know, in places,
That's not relevant.
parcels of land which are developable, non-developable. You know, we're assessing a planning application.
Very good.
It's not a.
Okay, all right, I agree then. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, moving on to Councillor Ian M. MacLeod. Do you have enough information to proceed today, or would you like a site visit?
I think I would be happier with the site visit. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Moving on to Councillor Finnegan.
I have enough information, thanks, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Susan Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I've got enough information.
Thank you. I move for the recommendations that we have enough information today to make a decision on this matter. Does Councillor McNeill want to bring this decision on whether we have a site visit or not to a vote, or is he happy to accept the majority of this, which is at present?
A vote, please.
Okay. Now refer to Mr. Mackay for procedure.
Chair, I think the first thing to determine, are you moving the recommendations in the report? And do you have a second, or is that agreed? Is that what the motion is?
It's the motion is whether we have a site visit.
Okay, the first one. So you are moving that we do not require a site visit. Do we have a seconder for that?
Second that.
And Councillor McNeill, I take it you're moving. We have a site visit. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, so
I'm happy to go straight into the vote.
Well, yep, if the board agrees, you have debate.
Okay, does the board agree we go straight into the vote? Yep.
Yes.
Very good. We'll go straight to the vote, Derek. Go.
Chair, as we have a number of members online, we'll need to do this by roll call. So the motion is to determine the matter today without a site visit, and the amendment from Councillor McNeill, seconded by Councillor MacLeod, is that we have a site visit prior to determining. So when I call your name, if you can clearly say motion or amendment. Chair?
Motion.
Vice Chair?
Motion.
Councillor Ian A. McNeill?
Amendment.
Amendment. Ian M. MacLeod?
Amendment.
Susan Thompson?
Motion.
Councillor Paul Finnegan?
Motion.
Councillor Robert Mackenzie?
Motion.
Councillor John Norman MacLeod?
Motion.
Councillor Ian Macaulay? And Councillor Finlay Stewart. That's 8 for the motion, 2 for the amendment. So we will move to determine the matter.
Thank you very much. So we've determined that we have enough information before us today to make a decision on this matter. I'd now like to bring you back to the recommendation, which is at item 3.1 in your report, which is that this planning application be refused. Are members content with that recommendation?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you all for your contributions. That is there for the finding of this item number 3 on today's meeting. Proceeding to item number 4, which is the co-review on a consultation on an application made to Scottish ministers under section 37 of the Electricity Act, Harris to Stornoway 132 kilovolt overhead power line. This report seeks to determine the view of the CONIA as a consultee in respect of a Scottish Government consultation regarding the application under section 37 of the Electricity Act for the proposed replacement of the Harris to Stornoway overhead electricity line. The board is asked to make a recommendation to CONIA in relation to this matter, and can I invite Mrs. Ferguson to speak on this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just advise members that we updated the Appendix 1 this morning. So just for members to refresh, was added SharePoint this morning to make a few corrections, typographical errors in the schedule that had been uploaded. So just to reinforce what the Chair has said there, this is not a planning application. It's a consultation by Scottish ministers, who are the determining body for developments under section 37 of the Electricity Act for overhead lines. The application is accompanied by an extensive environmental impact assessment report. So the applicant is Scottish and Southern Energy Networks. They submitted the application to the Scottish ministers through the Energy Consents Unit, and the application is for consent under section 37 of the Electricity Act, and also for ministers if they so decide to grant deemed planning permission under the Town and Country Planning Act for the works. Scottish ministers are the determining body, and it's for the Comhairle to provide its view. So it's a 132 kV transmission project. It's part of the electricity transmission network, or part of the grid. It's transporting electricity at very high voltage through overhead cables, in this case. And it follows on from the subsea cable having been upgraded or having been replaced from Skye to Harris last year. So this is a transmission project. It runs between the Harris grid supply point down near Grosby, and it is coming all the way up to Stornoway substation, the new substation that was built near Arnish Road End a couple of years ago. And because it's part of the transmission network, it is classed a national development in terms of National Planning Framework 4. As such, under a scheme of delegation, it will go to the Comhairle. The recommendation of the Planning Board will go to the Comhairle tomorrow. So the existing line is obviously aged, and the intention is to replace it with a new line, which will improve reliability. It'll meet the requirements for the operation of a modern circuit, and it'll also incorporate communications that'll allow the operator to be able to see whether faults in the line. It's the case that the existing 132 kV, which is 30 to 40 years old, that requires to remain operational until the proposed new line is completed and energised. So it's therefore the case that the new line has to be built completely independent of the existing. This is just like a location plan. It kind of just details the extent of the 58-kilometre length of the project. So coming in from the base of Harris into Tarbert, we'll go through the back of Tarbert to Ardhazig. It crosses over the road at Tarbert, crosses back over the road at Ardhazig near the petrol filling station. Goes on the landward side of the road because of the very steep topography where the existing line is, as far as close to Bunavenator, where it will cross back to the east side of the road, and then just round about the quarry will cross back to the west side of the road, and with the exception of the kind of bends coming down the Clusham, it pretty much stays on the west side of the road for most of the rest of the route. So it's a single circuit. It's 58 kilometres in distance. These projects identified like a corridor. So the corridor is 100 metres wide during the construction phase. It's 120 metres wide where you're passing through forest or trees. Once the line would be built, the permanent corridor would be reduced to 35 metres to allow for maintenance and to protect the area for the line itself. And it will be 60 metres through the trees because of the potential for trees to grow and fall, so that it gives clearance to the line. The proposal is for the new line to be carried on Trident H poles. These are kind of double poles, and they've got a cross bracing to stabilise between the poles. The EIA allows for pole height up to 18 metre at the extreme above ground level, but the average is about 10.5. The average span between the poles is 80 metres, although in some cases where it's crossing over water, for example, there may be a span of up to 120 metres. In cases where the span is greater, there may be a need to go to from timber poles to steel poles for structural stability. In addition to the kind of standard Trident H pole, there will be angle tension poles, failure containment poles, and terminal poles. And per the pole schedule at the moment, there is the installation of 671 double poles proposed. Difficult terrain through a lot of the, particularly through Harris coming through the hills. So this is the only image that's in this presentation, although we have other images available, but just to give members an idea of this is what the Trident H pole is like. The appendix to your report illustrated that what the existing poles, there's a variety of different types of pole on the existing line, but a number of them are single poles with a kind of also carrying 3 wires. So there are project, it's obviously a substantial project. It's going to take a minimum of 30 months to construct. There's 4 phases: the enabling works, the construction, then it'll have to be commissioned, and then there will be reinstatement works of both the new line and the decommissioning of the existing. So as I said before, both lines need to remain in place together for a period of time until the new line is commissioned and operational. Construction working hours are anticipated to be between 7 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock Monday to Friday, and up to 5 o'clock on Saturdays during the summer months, if you like, from April to September. During the winter months, the works are more likely to be restricted to daytime hours. So this just provides like a little bit of detail on each phase of the works. So the enabling works is basically that there are a number of other electricity lines in the kind of same general vicinity following the same direction. There's a 33 kV and there's an 11 kV. So there are places where the new line would cross over those. So there will have to be some local undergrounding of the local distribution network, if you like, to make way for the new development. There's also going to have to be areas of woodland removal to accommodate construction and safe operation and future maintenance of the line. And there will also have to be establishment of construction compounds. There will be a main compound, and then there will be other kind of like smaller compounds with facilities along through the different stages. The construction phase then requires obviously the removal of the turf and topsoil at each location. The excavation is for each pole is liable to be about 3 meters by 2.5 meter deep. There will obviously be double holes, given that you're double, these are double poles. Then erection of the poles using machinery, backfilling of the hole, and then obviously the cable conductors required to be strung between the poles and along the sections. Once all that's complete, it then has to be a commissioning stage where it all has to be checked, snagged, and then energized. Be sure that it's functioning. All the switchgear and communications would be sorted, and then it would be connected up through the substation at Stornoway. And then once all that's operational, they would then move to all the construction sites would be reinstated, any kind of access routes, any kind of tidying up of topsoil turfs at any of the pole locations. Some of that would be carried out obviously as you're going along, and then all the construction compounds would be reinstated to grass or moorland, you know, depending on what they were beforehand. And then finally the existing 132 kV would, from the Harris grid supply point to Stornoway, would be decommissioned. Poles would be taken down, and again that there would be like reinstatement. Poles would be cut like at foundation level, and the below ground parts would be left in the ground. They would be cut off below ground level where that's practical to do that. So just in terms of where's the site located, well, it's obviously over a long distance, 58 kilometres. It's following so far as possible the route, the original route of the 132 kV, but it obviously has to be set apart from it because it has to be a safe distance, and they also have to have regard to the topography and building the new line in a place where it's accessible to maintenance personnel and to plant in the future. Pretty much follows the A89 road from Harris. It crosses the road at various points as indicated earlier. The southern part of the project is located within the South Lewis, Harris and North Uist National Scenic Area. There are two wildland areas in Harris and Lewis, the Harris and Uig Hills and the Ishkin wildland area, and the route passes between them. The landscape character of in the area is primarily rocky moorland and prominent hills and mountains between, on the southern section, pretty much between the Harris grid supply point all the way up through Laxey to Luripost, and boggy moorland then really from Luripost into the substation at Stornoway. So just a bit more in terms of the site location. It's a kind of challenging environment.
Oh,
There are large areas of peatland. And as we discussed earlier, peatland is classed as the main reservoir of terrestrial organic carbon in Scotland. And it has associated important habitats, which include blanket bog, dry heath and wet heath. The whole route is laced with extensive network of lochs, lochans, pools, as well as rivers, streams, ditches. The site passes through a small part of the Lewis Peatlands Special Protection Area, which is protected as a habitat for birds, breeding birds, including the golden eagle. There's then a 2-kilometre section between Laxey and Leurepost, where it passes through the Lewis Peatlands Ramsar site, again like the highest level of designation, and that's for red-throated diver, black-throated diver, golden plover and greenshank, and there are also internationally important numbers of dunlin. And then while it's not through the west coast of Hebrides, it's sited within 200 metres of the eastern edge of the west coast of Hebrides Special Protection Area. That's at East Loch Tarbert and possibly Loch Seaforth. And it's within 1.5 kilometres of the North Harris Mountains Special Protection Area, which again is designated for eagle, and it's close to the Lewis Peatlands Special Area of Conservation, which is protected mainly again for bog habitats, but also for otter. So in order to meet the requirements of the regulations, SSE have prepared an environmental impact assessment, and that focused on the areas where there's potential for significant environmental effects that require to be considered, avoided, mitigated, where avoidance was not possible. So the 6 areas that have been considered are the seascape, landscape and visual amenity impacts of the project, impacts on cultural heritage, impacts on ecology, ornithology, hydrology, hydrogeology, geology and soils, and finally the traffic and transport impacts of the project. So starting first with key planning issue of impact on seascape, landscape and visual amenity. As the project's been designed, there's been an attempt, first of all, to minimise those impacts through appropriate siting and design. So the design goes for, so far as possible, a low profile wooden pole, H-pole. There will be some steel poles of which we don't yet have the information or design, which are required for longer spans across bog habitat or lochs. If attempted to keep the line so far as possible of high ground and high ridges so far as possible. It's followed an existing route as far as possible, and there has also been an assessment carried out of the impacts of the new route on the residential amenity of various groups of houses. And that's primarily in Tarbert, on the outskirts of Tarbert, at Arhazig, at Laxey, and one house which is unoccupied on the outskirts of Stornoway. And then the other impact, there will be a higher level of landscape and visual amenity impact while the 2 lines exist together, but that is for a fixed period of time, and the mitigation will effectively be the removal and reinstatement of the existing once the new one is energised. Within the environmental impact assessment, visualisations have been produced for each of these viewpoints. It's a very thorough assessment. It provides like a baseline view. In many cases, it provides the view in more than one direction. So the baseline is as the site is at the current day. It then provides a construction view where you would have the 2 lines existing together, and that's during that period. Obviously, there will be, more significant visual impact, landscape and visual impact, And then the third provision is when the new line would be in place, but the old one would have been taken down. And there are also wire frames. I've listed them there, but I haven't. It's a fairly lengthy piece of work. If any member wishes to see the viewpoints, visualizations from any of these viewpoints, we can bring them up at the end of the presentation, but I haven't included them within the PowerPoint, partly because they're fairly detailed and they would lose resolution if I imported them into the PowerPoint program. So I'll just let members have a look at those for just a moment. And if there are any particular viewpoints which you would wish to see, we can deal with that at the end of the presentation. So if we can now move on to the next key planning issue, which was cultural heritage. Again, the approach has been through minimising impact on cultural heritage. There's one scheduled monument at the Grimshadow Road end that through Stone Circle, and mitigation there is involved the preferred route being the initial preferred route being aligned to take the new line further away from the scheduled monument. Then to do with archaeology in general, there are various historic settlements along the route in different places. The aim is to avoid those where it's not possible, where the line is coming close to historic assets. They would be demarcated using just poles with flashes on them, so that plant doesn't run over archaeology inadvertently. There are sections of the route where there is high potential for archaeology, and there will be an archaeology watching brief carried out in those sections, and then the team would also involve an archaeological clerk of works. These issues are captured in the draft conditions. In ornithology, obviously the line is coming through quite extensive areas of moorland and areas protected for birds. And again, the approach is to minimise impact on protected birds by appointing damage to their habitat. An ecological clerk of works who would monitor the commitments made by the developer in the EIA. There will be a breeding bird protection plan, and there will be like surveys carried out on a regular basis during the nesting season till, and any nests till the birds had fledged. There will be working buffers established from nest sites that were discovered. There would be a best practice protocol which is produced by Nature Scott on the use of helicopters, particularly near raptors, and Schedule 1 species, which include hen harriers and golden eagle. And then there are 3 particular sections where there would be there's a commitment and a need for bird deflectors to be fitted onto the cables to avoid collision risk by birds, but also to avoid the actual cables themselves being power being interrupted by collision from birds. And the other issue is I've kind of combined them all onto one slide, which is dealing with the issue of ecology, hydrology, hydrogeology, geology and soils. And this is really where you're going through like sensitive habitats, bog habitats, where there are particular species that are identified in mosses, groundwater dependent terrestrial ecosystems, of which there are a number in the southern part in the bog environments. These are kind of contained areas where the habitat is dependent on connectivity with water, with groundwater. The approach has been to avoid areas of deep peat so far as possible. Obviously, it's not always possible to restore the peatland that's disturbed and to manage the risk of peat slide. It is the case that in some cases it would be more damaging to go underground with cables into bog habitats than it is to go overland with poles. And in areas where there is peat that can't be avoided, there is a proposal to use like bog shoes that provide stability to the poles. shows a commitment to avoid installing poles within lochs or within rivers, and to protect any private water supplies that are identified. Also to protect the water courses and avoid in-stream works where there are fish spawning or migrating. Also a need for a tree felling management plan to ensure that where there are stretches of trees that are taken down, that the trees are kept away from the water environment, that timber is removed, and that there is a compensatory tree planting plan to reinstate, as required by National Planning Framework and our own planning, that any trees lost are replanted. Then there's a commitment to try and use, so far as possible, existing crofting tracks by upgrading them and having to create new well mouths where possible, rather than creating completely new tracks. There would be a commitment to have an environmental clerk of works that would monitor the construction phase. There would be an environmental management plan, peatland management plan, and habitat management plan, species protection plan, all of which have been provided in draft, but will be developed further before the project would could actually move to construction phase if Scottish ministers, if council were minded to support and the Scottish ministers were minded to approve. And the other main issue, because of the scale of the project and the materials and the nature of the plant that would be required, is the impact on traffic and transport. Obviously, the main route that's going to be affected is the A859 from the kind of Crosby Road end up all the way to Stornoway. The traffic study that was carried out estimates that the maximum traffic effect would be roughly additional 20 car and light goods vehicles. So that's your kind of pickup truck in a day, and there would be an estimated 30 heavy goods vehicles movements per day additional to what's there already. There's a commitment to having a construction phase traffic management plan, which would be agreed with the Comhairle to help mitigate and offset the impacts of the construction phase, but also any operational phase traffic once the line would be in use. The line will also cover some core paths, including parts of the Hebridean Way. So there's also a commitment to have a path management plan, just to how you manage where paths are being closed or cut off, how you would redirect pedestrians walking those ways safely. There's also obviously going to be a need for appropriate traffic signage or traffic control where you're working near the roads or where there's heavy plant. There's also going to be a requirement for a number of new and upgraded junctions with the public road, and they must be designed to Comhairle standards. We don't have information on all of those yet, and that's also required by condition. And then roads also obviously looking for all site traffic to be part of the public road where it is at all possible. So how do we secure the mitigation that would be required to ensure that the impacts and the commitments made in the EIA are followed through on? Well, there is a schedule of mitigation provided in draft within the EIA report. That will be updated to reflect the consultation advice and the assessment that has been carried out through the report. And it would be updated in the construction environmental management plan. The recommendation is that any decision taken by the Comhairle or indeed by Scottish ministers is made subject to the conditions, and those are presented in a draft form as Appendix 1 to the report. There are a number of aspects of the design that require to be finalised, and that wouldn't happen until a contractor was appointed by the developer. The contractor would then carry out some detailed design work. And importantly, while the decision on the Section 37 applications fall to be made by Scottish ministers, if Scottish ministers do consent the scheme, the discharge as a condition and the management of all the information that's still required post that decision falls to the planning service to be dealt with. So effectively, if ministers approve it, then it's back to the council to deal with it through the next stages think that concludes the presentation. And I first asked, is any member wishing to see any of the visualizations before I move to the report?
Members happy to proceed as we were? Yep. So we're Morag.
Okay, so the report is with members. It is with the planning board for a recommendation today, and that recommendation will go before the Comhairle tomorrow. The report presents an executive summary in the front end of the report. And the implications are set out at section 4. The details on the application are at section 5, along with the planning hierarchy. It's confirmed that this is part of a national development because it's part of the high voltage electricity transmission grid. Section 5.6 to 5.9 sets out the environmental impact assessment on the structure of the report. The site context and the proposal is set out in section 6, which we've just covered in the presentation. Project need is set out at section 6.20, and the need is to address the condition of obviously like an ailing and aged existing connection. And there's a secondary requirement to improve resilience to avoid outages, which would mean having to power up the diesel generation station, and also an aim by the applicant to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Section 7 sets out the legislative context to this decision. So as we said, it is an application under the Electricity Act, and Scottish ministers have powers under section 57.2 to grant a deemed planning permission should they wish to do so. Planning history is set out there. Some members from the former council may recall that there was a report came before members in 2019 for section 37 consent for the section between Stornoway and Ballallan. That application, although members gave their view on that, that application was actually subsequently withdrawn, so it was never actually determined by Scottish ministers. That route is subsumed into the current project, with the exception of the deviation that is largely subsumed into the current project, probably the notable exception being the deviation for the Drimthou Stone Circle. Section 9 sets out the consultation advice that was received from all the various consultees. These consultations are largely issued by Energy Consents Unit, and then we also carry out stakeholders consultation within the Comhairle itself. Public participation for section 37 consent is quite extensive. The developer has carried out the public consultation exercise that was required pre-application, has produced a pre-application consultation report, and they have, for the purposes of the determination, placed copies of the environmental impact assessment in the library at Kinloch Community Hub and in Tarbert Community Library. Section 11 then deals with the policy content, and I think what is important to stress is that the development plan does not have primacy when determining these applications. The approach is set out at section 12.1, but what the role of the development plan and its policies in understanding and assessing the impacts in a local context and addressing the generic duties that are placed upon the transmission licence holder under section 9 of the Electricity Act. So the main issues that we've covered in the presentation have then been assessed, and the recommendation is contained at section 3 at the think it's page 2 of the report. So the recommendation is that the planning board consider and note the contents of the report. Secondly, that members agree that when taking into account the development plan, which now comprises the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan and National Planning Framework 4, and having taken into account relevant material considerations, that the Comhairle raises no objection to the Section 37 application, or indeed the request for deemed planning permission, subject to Scottish ministers incorporating the conditions that are based upon those set out in draft form in Appendix 1 to the report. Within any decision, should Scottish ministers determine to grant consent, and also that the Comhairle will authorise the Deputy Chief Executive to convey that view to the Energy Consents Unit. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Morag, for that very extensive report. We appreciate that. I'd now like to open this out to members of the board for any questions or comments relating to this item. Vice Chair.
This is a huge undertaking, and I think thank you for the report. It's a very detailed, excellent report. They face many challenges to get this done, but I'm happy with the recommendations.
Are members in agreement? Sorry. Oh, Councillor Finnegan online.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the consultation has been very extensive by SSE, and so I can't fault that. The only slight disappointment in the fact that down in Harris, the Harris business was potentially affected by the route of the poles, and a potential different route had been looked at. I think probably it was too late in the day to really spend a lot of time dealing with that in terms of actually seriously looking at that route properly, but it was an option that was highlighted that could have mitigated the situation with that business. But I think it was basically too late in the day really when it was identified. But so that's my only kind of, it's just a note I wanted to make, just a bit of a disappointment in that respect. But and I can't really see it. I have no other objections. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Finnegan. Would you like to comment on that, Morag? Be aware of it?
No, nothing to add. I think like the process that is used by the developer is fairly lengthy and extensive. So they start with a very wide options corridor, and they narrow that down, and they have gone through a series of consultations over the last number of years. So I would counter that a late, that it would have come to them late because they did engage, and we did attempt ourselves, as well as SSE, did communicate quite extensively every stage of consultation that took place, both online through COVID and through the consultations exercises that were carried out in person in the later stages of the design development. I think the reality with all projects is that you can't accommodate all of the people all of the time, and it's perhaps, I mean, I'm not aware of the very specific one. We have to determine our view in the public interest, and so we're looking at the wider implications. But there was a residential visual amenity assessment carried out, and that has been considered and reported on in the report.
Very good. Thank you for that. Are you happy with that, Paul?
Yeah, I agree very much with Morag. I mean, this came up very late in the day, and there had been extensive consultation by SSE, and they had met with the particular landowner a couple of times, and it was very late. And it wasn't a consultant, but it was an advisor who'd been working for some of the other not agencies, but land trusts and stuff up and down the route, who had made certain points. And I think this person came forward very, very late, to be fair, and SSEN did look at the route. I mean, they did actually look at the route, and I just felt that they, probably because it was so late in the day, they didn't really have time to really look at it in as much detail as they would have probably had they been found out about it or known about it earlier on. They had looked at the route originally and then dismissed it as not an option, but then they were asked to look at it again in slightly different light, and they basically came to the same position, but I suspect it was more to do with the time scale then. But no, I have to agree with Morag that the consultation couldn't be faulted in any shape or form, to be honest. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Finnegan. Do members agree with the recommendations set out at 3.1? Agreed. Thank you. That is it for the finding of that item. Can I thank you all for your attendance? And I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting of the Planning Application Board. Thank you and good afternoon.